Hello, my random viewers, and welcome to Randomly Offensive. Today we are continuing the story of King II. When we last left off, there was an imposter of Armored King, and during Marduk's and King's investigation to make sure that this was truly an imposter, the Armored King imposter shows up at the gravesite of Armored King and commences battle with King and Marduk. Armored King charges in and jumps into the air, extending his right leg, kicking Marduk in the face, while simultaneously extending his left leg, kicking King into the chest, knocking them both back. Armored King then dives towards Marduk, throwing massive uppercuts into the rib cages of Marduk. Marduk starts rope-a-doping them and blocking them with his biceps, but every time a strike is blocked in the torso, Armored King then delivers a massive hook to the jawline of Marduk, rocking him backwards, rocking him side to side, and just shaking the giant beast that Marduk is. Armored King is also delivering massive roundhouse kicks to the kneecaps of Marduk, trying to knock down this giant. And anytime Armored King just takes his eyes off of King for a second, King will come in and they try to double up on this imposter. However, Armored King manages to swipe King away using wrist grapples, tossing him to the side, continuing his onslaught on Marduk. His main target is Marduk. Now, as Armored King is giving Marduk this massive onslaught and using the spikes that he has on his armor to slash the skin of Marduk and jab them into the biceps and the legs of Marduk, he is obviously trying to kill King's new best friend. And so King manages to sneak up behind Armored King and grapple him around the waistline and just throws him over backwards and slamming Armored King down to the ground. However, Armored King is incredibly durable and gets right back up and delivers a massive roundhouse to King, throwing him across the graveyard. Armored King then tackles Marduk, but does not tackle him to the ground. He tackles him with his shoulder and just charges outside of the gravestone, or out of the graveyard, with Marduk. As Marduk is elbowing the back of Armored King, trying to get him to let go, they eventually leave the graveyard and go right into a busy highway, and Marduk gets slammed right into the trailer of a semi-truck, and they are now standing in the middle of the freeway, exchanging blows and dancing around each other as Marduk is trying to take down this Armored King, and Armored King is trying to kill Marduk. Armored King then pulls a stop sign out of the ground and swings it like a baseball bat, sending Marduk flying down the highway, and then Marduk then gets nicked by a moving car. Now, most of these cars are trying to weave out of the way, not to run over these two massive titans that are engaged in combat in the middle of traffic. Armored King and Marduk engage in battle, walking through and fighting their way down the highway into the city center. And Armored King is just beating the crap out of Marduk and manages to get a hold of Marduk's skull, smashing it against the corner of a brick store. And as he repeatedly smashes the skull of Marduk into the store, Marduk is trying to reach up and grab the face of Armored King and grab anything he can to try to get Armored King to let go. But Armored King just keeps batting away the hand and continuously smashes Marduk's skull against the building, and then throws Marduk down onto the ground where his neck is hanging off of the sidewalk, and he is about to stomp on the face of Marduk, snapping his neck, at least attempting to snap his neck. And just in time, King manages to finally make it to where they were and tackles Armored King, Now, Marduk is out for the count. He has flesh wounds everywhere from the spikes of Armored King. He was nicked by a car. He was smashed into the trailer of a truck in the middle of a fast-moving, paced traffic. And so this guy's injured. He's down for a while. And now it is just King and Armored King as they exchange blows. Finally, Armored King has enough, and it seems like he just easily catches King's punch and then delivers a massive uppercut to King, knocking him back. Armored King then is about to have a conversation with King. Armored King asks why. Why is King friends with the man that killed his mentor, the man that killed his father figure? And King just looks at Armored King and he explains the true reason. Because in the events of Tekken 3, King got to feel and actually see his vengeance, his rage, and his anger. He got to see it, and it terrified him that something that awful could exist inside of him. And it came back when he lost Armored King, realizing that he was about to do something that was truly awful and that he could never forgive himself for. So he has made a vow. King has made a vow to himself to never go down that path again. And with that being said, King continues to explain that King the First would have never gone down the road of vengeance, for he was a pure, kind-hearted man that only did what was right. And Armored King too would not go down the road of vengeance, and that this was not the way. Forgiveness was the best way to make the world a better place. Armored King does not want to hear any of this, and it enrages him even more. And so he goes in for the kill on King. Armored King charges at King, walking just slightly past him as he charges, extending his left hand and grabbing the face of King, and then thrusting him forward into the window of a store, smashing his face through glass. And as King is bent over backwards through this window, then Armored King just starts delivering these massive blows into the gut of King. With him being bent over like this, it is going to cause much, much more damage. King cannot use his muscles to protect the organs he has inside of his body, right? And so this damages King, and King quickly bends back over through the glass, not knowing that a massive uppercut is waiting for him to send him back flying into the window of the store. And King goes back flipping into the store as Armored King jumps through and starts grabbing whatever he can to just try to annihilate King. He's reaching over and just grabbing glass jars off the shelves, slamming them into the skull and the face of King. He is just knocking over shelves on top of King while delivering sweep kicks to King, making sure that King is not standing up straight to catch these shelves. Finally, King just tackles Armored King and lunges him through the wall of the store back outside and throws him across. And now King realizes the pure force and the pure anger that Armored King has. This guy is not going to let King walk away alive. And so King gets into a defensive stance, learning everything that he's learned from Julia, Lee, Kuma, and Makujin. King has what it takes to survive, and he, thanks to the training with Makujin, knows how to adapt to different fighting styles. And so he puts a little bit of a dance to his step, but more of a defensive, stern barrier with his arms. King then incorporates Julia's fighting style when it comes to the graceful dodging of Armored King's attacks as he steps gracefully and using his hand to just gently push the strikes away, while simultaneously using Kuma's pure strength with a counter strike, and then using Makujin's fighting style and fighting adaptability in order to predict what Armored King is going to do next. And of course, Lee's training showing him that he can be pushed to the very limit and that he could survive being pushed to the edge. And so that's exactly what he intends to do, is push himself to the edge to bring down Armored King. Armored King is not letting up, however. He sees all of this. He sees King as a great opponent. So he pulls out a very large hunting blade out of the back pocket that he had right underneath his armor and swings it at King. The blade connects to King, and King drops with the blade shoved into his gut, looking at Armored King, astonished at the pure level of desperation that Armored King is at, for he was never at this level. Even with Ogre, he wanted to do it with his bare hands, with his pure strength. And Armored King, what makes this worse of a defeat is Armored King did not need a blade to bring down King. He did it because it was convenient and easy. Armored King far outmatched King when it came to pure strength, ability, combat, and what have you. Marduk finally catches up to these two as he sees his best friend on the ground and on his knees with a massive blade in his gut. And so Marduk, in rage, charges towards Armored King, and King tries to say stop. King tries to tell Marduk not to do it, but he cannot speak, for the blade is just causing too much pain. And so as Marduk charges Armored King, Armored lunges in and picks up Marduk, smashing him into the ground, gets on top of Marduk, and just starts delivering unstoppable blows directly into the face of Marduk. King tries to stand up and tries to get to Armored King before he kills his best friend, before he does something that he is going to regret. King needs to save 2 lives at this point, but he just cannot walk long enough to get to where Marduk and Armored King are. And he starts to panic and begins to pull himself with his arms, crawling to Armored King and Marduk. King finally gets to Marduk and Armored King and picks himself up and pushes King off of Marduk and forces Armored King to the ground as he stares into the eyes of Armored King. And though Armored King is wearing the Black Jaguar mask, he can see tears running down the neck right underneath the mask of Armored King. And he builds up the strength so that he can finally talk, and he tells Armored King that this is not the way, and that if he does this, there is no coming back. Armored King is not listening as he's struggling to get King off of him, and finally he does get King off of him. And as he goes back to finish off Marduk, the police finally show up and arrest all 3 of them. After being put in jail for a little while, King manages to negotiate with the police and pays for all the damages and gets Marduk released along with himself. He also pleads with the police that Armored King is in a bad spot and needs therapy, and so they work out an agreement to help out Armored King. And so Armored King is still wanting to know who this man is, and he wants to know. And as the years pass, he begins to look for Armored King, because after Armored King leaves therapy and leaves prison, there is no sign of him. And so King searches for this man in hopes that he can save him from this path. And that is when he receives an invitation from Marduk for the 6th Iron Fist tournament. And they both hope that Armored King will be there so that they can finish this once and for all. As King and Marduk enter the 6th Iron Fist tournament, they see Armored King along with all the other competitors: Asuka, Bayek, Bruce, Christy, Ganru, Hurwong, Law, Lily, Paul, Steve, Bob, and of course themselves. And in the first round, of course, this strikes fear into King, because the first round is Marduk and Armored King, and he knows what's driving Armored King. He knows that Armored King, for one reason or another, regardless of who this man is, has been wanting revenge on Marduk, just like he wanted revenge on Marduk so many years ago. And so with the first round on the way, it plays out completely differently than how you would expect. Armored King has gone through incredible transformations, however not emotional, purely physical. And as Marduk throws a massive punch to Armored King, he catches it with one hand with ease and then spins around, delivering a spinning reverse hook kick right into the jaw of Marduk, knocking out the Titan of Marduk. We all know what Marduk's capable of. We all know how strong Marduk is. We know that Marduk can take a hell of a beating, and he is knocked out with one blow from Armored King. And now King is up for a round, and he has to win. He has to face Armored King once again, and he has to find out what Armored King is about. King's first opponent is Ganru. Now remember, in Tekken 6, Paul and Law rigged the tournament so that they can win. And so what they did was they got a hold of the roster and made sure they set up the roster in a way to where all the strongest fighters were facing each other, so that they were exhausted, winded, and tired by the ending of the round. And then they also had Steve, who was going to throw the match once he made it to the semifinals. And so that is why we have Marduk versus Armored King right off the bat, why we have King against Ganru right off the bat. And so Ganru is just absorbing all the strikes that King is throwing out. He is an incredible sumo wrestler, and that's kind of what he does, right? He absorbs attacks, and he delivers massive open palm strikes. However, King, using what he learned from Akujin and Julia, is able to avoid these strikes, and he starts doing much more fluid attacks that are at a faster pace with not as much strength or power behind them, just to wind Ganru. And he spins around Ganru, he dances around Ganru, throwing attacks to the legs. Since Ganru's a sumo wrestler, not having the proper strength in his legs could be very devastating for him as the fight goes on, and King is aware of this. So King definitely does everything he can to tire out Ganru. And after about 8 minutes of Ganru taking punishment and being danced around and not being able to land a strike on King, Ganru finally starts to tire, and King delivers a massive right hook into Ganru, followed by a massive left hook into Ganru, and then followed again by a right hook, followed again by a left hook, and this continues over and over and over and over until Ganru is laying face first on the mat, and the match is won, going to King. King gets to match up against Armored King once again in the second round, and now King knows the strength of Armored King, but he also knows the pain and sorrow of Armored King. He understands what Armored King is going through, though he doesn't know what the original Armored King was. When it comes to this Armored King, he doesn't know what the relationship was, but he does understand what Armored King's going through, why he chose the path of vengeance. And so he goes in and commences battle with Armored King. However, this, like I said before, is a completely different version of Armored King than what they fought just a few months or a year ago, right? This Armored King has gone through huge changes, and now King just cannot land a punch. Armored King is dancing around them like they're nothing, dodging them like they're nothing, and mocking King as he goes to throw a punch that would connect and stopping short. This enrages King. He's making a fool out of King. And this type of revenge is completely different than just wanting to kill them. He is out to humiliate Marduk and King, and that's exactly what he is doing. And so King tries to get into a grapple with Armored King, and Armored King manages to wiggle his way around King, reversing the grapple, locking King's legs in place, locking King's arms behind his back, and locking his neck into a chokehold simultaneously, and then falls backwards, bringing King down, with King on top of Armored King. However, it's in a grapple, so King is not at the advantage, and he manages to force King to pass out, taking the round seemingly easily, right? And so Armored King moves on to the third round. King and Marduk, as they're leaving, they're realizing the pure force of Armored King, and that this new rival is going to be a problem for quite some time. Now, Armored King moves on to the semifinals and is facing against Law. However, Paul manages to sneak laxatives into a meal that Armored King was having just before the match, and so Armored King ends up not being able to compete in that round. And then Steve goes up against Paul, and Steve throws the match, leaving it up to Paul and Law. And of course, they rigged it so that they could both win, and so the tournament goes to them. Now, of course, throughout the events of Tekken 6 and Tekken 7, they are in the middle of World War III. And throughout World War III, people are trying to find entertainment, which is where professional wrestling comes in. Because though there are not any Iron Fist tournaments throughout the actual duration of World War III, they are still living their daily lives, right? And so King is in the professional wrestling world along with Marduk, and now along with Armored King. And so throughout the years, Armored King and King are just growing immensely in strength, constantly trying to one-up each other, while Marduk is on the side trying to keep up with the both of them. And so King will take some fights, and Armored King will take other fights, and they become one of the most iconic rivals the world has ever seen. And there's always incredible hype when these two are on screen. And I will absolutely continue with King's story and finally get to his climax and his conclusion in the next video. So, the next video will be about King in Tekken 7. He has a huge part in the tournament of Tekken 7 due to the other main characters and the other characters who have their due being done with. And he finally gets the spotlight that he's deserved in Tekken 7. And he gets a new rival with Jack 7. And so going up against Jack 7, he also has an incredible conclusion with Armored King. So with that all being said, if you guys made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Do consider hitting the like and subscribe button, maybe even sharing. It helps me out a lot. I'm a small channel. Do not get hit by a meteor. Take care of yourselves, and bye.